There comes a moment in life when you finally get tired of chasing, tired of over-explaining, tired of loving someone harder just to receive less in return. And if you've ever dealt with an avoidant person, you know exactly what I mean. The more you chase them, the more they pull away. The more love you give, the colder they become. The more available you are, the less they value your presence. But here's what most people never understand. Avoidants do not suddenly come back because you begged perfectly. They come back when they feel your energy leaving their life. That is the shift. The day you stop trying to force love is the day they start feeling the loss. See, most people panic when they avoid and distances themselves. They send paragraphs. They ask for reassurance. They try to prove their worth. But all that does is confirm one thing in the avoidance mind. You'll always be there. And human beings rarely fight for what they believe they can never lose. So if you want the avoidant to come back, stop focusing on getting them back. Focus on rebuilding yourself. Start becoming stronger emotionally. Start creating a life that no longer revolves around their mood swings. Start pushy, king up with purpose again. Start becoming dangerous in your confidence. Because confidence changes everything. Not loud confidence, not fake confidence, real confidence. The kind that says, I love deeply, but I do not abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable. That energy shakes people, especially avoidants, because avoidants are used to emotional pursuit. They expect you to chase. They expect you to panic. They expect you to wait forever. But when you become calm instead of desperate, their mind starts spinning. Why aren't they reacting? Why do they suddenly feel different? What if they're finally moving on? And that's when the emotional pressure begins. Silence is powerful, not toxic silence, not manipulation, but silence that comes from self-respect. Silence that says, I will no longer force connection where effort is not mutual. That silence becomes unforgettable because now they can feel the space you once filled. Your attention, your warmth, your energy, gone. And suddenly the person who once acted emotionally unavailable starts checking your social media, starts replaying conversations in their head, starts wondering who now has access to the version of pushy, you they took for granted. This is where most people make a mistake. The avoidance starts returning, and they instantly collapse emotionally again. Do not return to the old version of yourself. If they come back, they must meet a stronger you, a calmer you, a more emotionally grounded version of you, because your power was never in chasing them. Your power was always in your presence. And when that presence is no longer guaranteed, people feel it deeply. You must understand this. An avoidant often suppresses emotions while you are available, but absence forces emotions to surface. That's why many avoidants come back late. Not because they never cared, but because distance finally removed the distraction. And now they are left alone with the memory of you, your voice, your support, your energy, your loyalty. And here's the truth most people are afraid to hear. Sometimes the greatest revenge is becoming unrecognizable in your growth. Not bitter, not cruel, just evolved. You become so focused, so peaceful, so emotionally strong that the avoidant can no longer reach the broken version of you they once had access to. That changes everything because now your attention has value. Now why? Pushy. Our absence has weight. Now your peace becomes intimidating. And suddenly, the avoidant who once disappeared starts trying to reconnect. The avoidant who once ignored you starts watching silently. The avoidant who once acted emotionally detached begins feeling emotional urgency. Why? Because human beings are deeply affected by what they can no longer control. And when you stop needing them to choose you, you become unforgettable. So if you truly want the avoidant to come back, stop chasing closure. Stop forcing love. Stop abandoning yourself. Instead, build your body, build your confidence, build your peace, build your mission. Build a life so powerful that your energy naturally becomes magnetic again. Because attraction grows in space. And the strongest thing you can ever do is show someone that losing you was a real loss. The moment they realize your love was rare, your loyalty was genuine, and your presence is no longer guaranteed, that is the moment the avoidant starts fighting for access to you again. Not because you begged, but because you finally remembered your worth. Most people think the way to make an avoidant come back is to hold on tighter. They think if they love, pushy, harder, text more, explain better, or stay available long enough, the avoidant will finally realize their value. But the truth is completely opposite. The more you chase someone who fears emotional closeness, the more pressure they feel. And the more pressure they feel, the more distance they create. That cycle destroys people emotionally because they keep trying to earn love that should have been freely given. The moment you stop chasing is the moment everything begins to change. Not because you are playing games, but because you are finally shifting your focus back to yourself. Avoidants often become comfortable when they know you will always stay, no matter how little effort they give. They unconsciously rely on your emotional availability while giving you inconsistency in return. But when you stop making them the center of your life, something powerful happens. The energy changes completely. Instead of spending your mornings checking if they texted you, you start focusing on your own routine again. You start taking care of your body, your goals, your confidence, your peace. You begin rebuilding the parts of yourself you ignored while trying to keep the relationship alive. And that, pushy, is where real transformation starts. Because nothing is more attractive than someone who regains control of their own life. An avoidant expects emotional chasing. They expect repeated attempts to reconnect. They expect emotional reactions. But when your energy becomes calm, grounded, and focused on growth instead of desperation, they feel the difference immediately. Suddenly, you are no longer predictable. You are no longer emotionally available on command. And that uncertainty creates emotional tension inside them. Most people do not understand this. Attraction grows when there is emotional space. If someone constantly has access to your attention, your validation loses impact. But when your attention is no longer guaranteed, your value increases naturally. This is why rebuilding yourself is so important. It is not about pretending not to care. It is about genuinely reconnecting with your own identity outside the relationship. You start remembering who you were before the emotional exhaustion. You reconnect with your ambition. You become more disciplined. You stop abandoning your standards just to keep someone comfortable. And slowly, your confidence stops depending on whether he avoidant chooses you or not. That confidence becomes magnetic. Because now, when the avoidant looks at you, they no longer see someone waiting in emotional pain. They see someone evolving, someone becoming stronger, someone becoming harder to replace. And that realization creates emotional fear inside them. Not fear that comes from manipulation, but fear of truly losing someone valuable. The avoidant begins wondering why you are quieter now, why your energy feels different. Why do you no longer seem emotionally trapped by their behavior? They start checking your presence more carefully because your absence suddenly feels real. This is why rebuilding yourself is the most powerful thing you can do. Not to punish them, not to prove something, but because your life should never collapse around another person's inability to love consistently. The strongest position you can ever stand in is one where your happiness, confidence, and identity are no longer controlled by whether someone stays or leaves. One of the biggest mistakes people make with an avoidant is believing that more communication will automatically create more connection. So they keep texting, keep explaining, keep asking questions. Pushy. Questions and keep trying to pull emotions out of someone who emotionally shuts down under pressure. But what they do not realize is that constant contact often removes the one thing that creates emotional impact in an avoidance mind space. Silence creates emotional pressure in a way that words never can. When you are always available, always reacting, and always reaching out first, the avoidant never truly gets the chance to feel your absence. Your energy becomes predictable. They know that no matter how distant they become, you will still be there trying to reconnect. That certainty lowers emotional urgency. Human beings naturally value what feels limited, uncertain, or difficult to replace. And avoidants are no exception to that. The moment you stop flooding them with your presence, something changes psychologically. The emotional noise disappears. Suddenly, there are no long paragraphs to ignore, no emotional conversations to escape from, no constant reassurance being handed to them. At first, the avoidant may even feel relief because the pressure is gone. But after the silence settles in, another feeling begins to appear: curiosity. They begin wondering why you stopped react. Pushy. Eyeing the same way. Why are you suddenly quiet? Why are you no longer chasing? Why does your energy feel distant now? And this is where silence becomes powerful. Not silence used as manipulation. Not silence designed to punish someone emotionally. But silence that comes from emotional self-respect. Silence that says, I will no longer force connection where effort is not mutual. That kind of silence changes your entire energy. Because now, instead of trying to convince someone to value you, you are allowing them to experience life without your constant attention. And absence has a strange way of revealing emotional truths people were avoiding before. When the avoidant no longer hears from you every day, your presence becomes more noticeable through its absence. They begin replaying memories in their mind, small moments they ignored before suddenly feel emotionally heavier. Your warmth, your attention, your consistency, all the things they once took for granted become more visible once they are gone. This is why silence creates emotional pressure. It forces the avoidant to sit with their own thoughts instead of constantly reacting to yours. And most people ruin this stage because they pushy. I panicked too early. They break the silence out of fear. The moment they feel anxious or lonely, they reach out again looking for reassurance. But emotional pressure only works when there is enough space for the avoidant to actually feel the emotional consequences of distance. Silence also helps you regain your own emotional control. Constant communication with an avoidant can slowly make you emotionally dependent on small signs of attention. One text can control your mood. One delayed response can ruin your peace. But silence breaks that addiction. It forces you to reconnect with yourself instead of obsessing over their behavior. And ironically, the less emotionally dependent you become, the more attractive your energy becomes. Because now your silence carries weight. It feels different. It no longer feels like emotional desperation hidden behind words. It feels calm, grounded, and strong. And that is what unsettles the avoidant the most, realizing the person who once chased them endlessly is finally learning how to live without needing them every moment. One thing that deeply affects an avoidant is emotional unpredictability. Most people misunderstand this concept completely. The cushy. You think being unpredictable means playing games, acting cold, or trying to make someone jealous. But true emotional unpredictability is something far more powerful than manipulation. It is becoming emotionally balanced enough that your reactions are no longer controlled by the avoidant's behavior. Avoidants become emotionally comfortable when they can predict you. They expect that if they pull away, you will chase harder. If they become distant, you will panic. If they disappear emotionally, you will over-explain your feelings trying to reconnect. Over time, they begin to rely on this pattern because it gives them emotional control without requiring vulnerability from them. But the moment your behavior changes, their emotional certainty disappears. When you stop reacting emotionally to every small shift in their mood, the avoidant immediately feels something different. Suddenly, you are not as easy to read. You are calm where you used to be anxious. You are focused on yourself instead of monitoring them constantly. You are no longer emotionally collapsing every time they create distance. That change creates curiosity, because avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional pressure, but they are also highly sensitive to emotional shifts. They notice when your energy changes. They notice when you stop seeking validation from them. And what unsettles them most is realizing they no longer have the same emotional influence over you. This is why emotional unpredictability becomes magnetic. When someone knows exactly how to trigger your emotions, they stop respecting your emotional boundaries. But when your peace no longer depends on their attention, your energy becomes harder to control. You stop looking emotionally dependent. And nothing changes attraction faster than emotional independence. Instead of sending emotional paragraphs when they become distant, you remain grounded. Instead of trying to force clarity, you allow space. Instead of proving your worth constantly, you quietly continue building your own life. And that calmness creates emotional tension because the avoidant expects emotional chaos, not emotional strength. Most avoidants are used to people reacting strongly to their inconsistency. They are used to guilt, pressure, emotional demands, or repeated attempts to reconnect. But when you respond with calm confidence instead of emotional desperation, tear ups the entire pattern they are familiar with. Now they start wondering what changed inside you. They begin asking themselves questions they never considered before. Why do they seem so at peace lately? Why am I not getting the same reaction anymore? What if they are finally moving on emotionally? And those questions slowly create emotional anxiety inside the avoidant. Because when your attention no longer feels guaranteed, your value increases naturally. The key is that your unpredictability must come from genuine self-growth, not performance. Fake detachment never lasts. Pretending not to care while secretly obsessing over them still leaks emotional neediness. Real emotional unpredictability happens when your life becomes fuller outside the relationship. Your happiness is no longer tied to their behavior every single day. You begin responding instead of reacting. That changes everything, because emotionally grounded people are rare. Calm energy is rare. Someone who can love deeply without losing themselves is rare. And when an avoidant feels that emotional shift in you, they often become more emotionally drawn to you than ever before. Not because you force them, but because your energy no longer feels emotionally controllable. One of the most powerful things you can ever do after an avoidant pulls away is raise your value quietly. Most people try to prove their value loudly. They post things hoping to get attention. They try to make the avoidant jealous. They over-explain their growth. They desperately want the other person to see that they are doing better. But true value never needs to announce itself. Real confidence is felt long before it is spoken. Avoidants are extremely sensitive to energy changes. They may not always express emotions openly, but they notice when someone's emotional state shifts. They notice when the person who once depended heavily on their attention suddenly becomes more centered, more disciplined, and more fulfilled without them. That quiet transformation creates a level of attraction that emotional chasing never could. When you start rebuilding your life silently, you create emotional intrigue naturally. You stop making your healing a performance for them to watch. Instead, your focus becomes genuine self-improvement. You start taking your health seriously. You begin investing in your goals again. You reconnect with why. Pushy. Our confidence, your routine, your peace, and your identity outside the relationship. Slowly, your energy becomes stronger, and strong energy changes how people see you. The avoidant begins noticing that your world no longer revolves around them. They see that you are no longer emotionally available at every moment. You are no longer constantly trying to prove your love or earn their attention. Instead, you see more grounded, more composed, more emotionally stable. That quiet confidence becomes deeply attractive because it feels real. Most people confuse value with appearance, attention, or status. But emotional value comes from something much deeper. It comes from self-respect. It comes from emotional control. It comes from knowing your worth without needing constant validation from another person. When you quietly raise your standards, your energy naturally changes. You stop tolerating inconsistency the way you once did. You stop abandoning your own needs just to keep someone close. You stop shrinking yourself emotionally to make another person comfortable. And the avoidant feels it shift immediately because now your attention feels earned instead of automatic. That is a major, pushy, or psychological change. People often appreciate things more when they realize access is no longer guaranteed. When you are constantly available, the avoidant may have unconsciously assumed you would always stay no matter what happened. But when you begin evolving without needing their reassurance, they start realizing something uncomfortable. You may actually outgrow the relationship. That realization creates emotional tension. Now they start paying closer attention to you. They begin wondering what caused such a strong transformation. They become curious about your emotional distance, your confidence, and your peace. And ironically, the less you try to impress them, the more impactful your growth becomes. This is why silent growth is so powerful. It carries authenticity. It does not scream for attention. It does not beg to be noticed. It simply radiates through your actions, your mindset, and your emotional stability. And nothing unsettles an avoidant more than realizing the person they once had emotional control over is no longer waiting for permission to become powerful. When you quietly improve your life, you create a different kind of attraction. Not attraction based on emo, pushy, Chanel dependency, but attraction based on respect. Because people are naturally drawn toward those who value themselves deeply. And when your confidence becomes internal instead of dependent on external validation, your entire presence becomes harder to ignore. One of the hardest things to learn when dealing with an avoidant is how to detach without becoming cold. Most people swing to extremes. In the beginning, they give too much emotionally. They overinvest, overchase, and overexplain themselves trying to keep the connection alive. Then, after getting hurt repeatedly, they shut down completely. They become bitter, distant, and emotionally unavailable themselves. But true emotional power exists in the middle. It is the ability to care deeply without losing control of yourself. That balance is rare. Detachment does not mean you stop loving someone. It means your emotional stability no longer depends on their behavior. You stop allowing their inconsistency to control your peace every single day. If they pull away, you do not collapse emotionally. If they become distant, you do not immediately panic. Instead, you remain grounded in yourself. Avoidants are used to emotional intensity, pushy. They are used to people reacting strongly when they create distance. They often expect guilt, pressure, emotional arguments, or desperate attempts to reconnect. But when you respond with calmness instead of emotional chaos, something changes psychologically. Your energy becomes harder to manipulate. That is what makes emotional detachment so powerful. You are no longer operating from fear of losing them. You are no longer sacrificing your dignity just to maintain connection. Instead, you are emotionally centered enough to accept reality without abandoning your self-respect. And that emotional control becomes magnetic. Because calm people carry a different kind of presence. They do not force. They do not beg. They do not chase validation. They understand their value whether someone recognizes it or not. An avoidant can feel that shift immediately. When you detach in a healthy way, your conversations become different. Your energy becomes lighter. You stop trying to control outcomes. You stop obsessing over every delayed text or emotional withdrawal. Instead of reacting impulsively, you give space naturally. That emotional maturity creates safety because it removes pressure from the pushy interaction. Ironically, avoidants often move closer when they stop feeling emotionally trapped. But healthy detachment also protects you. It prevents you from becoming emotionally consumed by someone else's inconsistency. Many people lose themselves trying to love an avoidant. Their entire mood depends on whether the avoidant is emotionally available that day. They become anxious, hyper-focused, and emotionally exhausted. But detachment breaks that cycle. You begin remembering that your life still matters outside the relationship. Your goals matter. Your peace matters. Your confidence matters. Your emotional health matters. And once you truly understand that, you stop begging for the bare minimum. This does not mean becoming cold or punishing. Coldness is usually wounded pride pretending to be strength. Real detachment is calm. It does not seek revenge. It does not try to hurt the other person back. It simply says, I care about you, but I also care about myself enough not to lose my peace. That energy changes everything. Because now the avoidant is dealing with someone emotionally balanced instead of emotionally dependent. They can no longer predict emotional explosions or despair, pushy, rate reactions. Instead, they feel the quiet strength of someone who can love deeply without becoming consumed by fear. And that creates respect. Respect is one of the strongest forms of attraction. Strong emotional boundaries create respect because they communicate self-worth without words. When you detach without bitterness, you show the avoidant that your love was genuine, but your identity does not disappear when connection becomes inconsistent. That kind of emotional stability is rare, unforgettable, and deeply impactful. One of the biggest emotional triggers for an avoidant is the realization that they may truly lose access to you forever. Most avoidants suppress emotions while the connection still feels available. As long as they believe you will remain emotionally attached, they often keep their feelings buried under distraction, distance, or emotional avoidance. But the moment they sense that your energy is genuinely leaving their life, something inside them begins to shift. Human beings naturally react more strongly to potential loss than guaranteed presence. When someone feels certain they can return to you whenever they want, emotional urgency disappears. Your attention, pushy, becomes familiar. Your love becomes expected. Your loyalty becomes something they unconsciously rely on without fully appreciating. But once that certainty begins to disappear, the emotional reality finally hits them. This is why making an avoidant fear losing access to you forever changes the emotional dynamic completely. Not through manipulation, not through threats, not through jealousy games, but through genuine emotional detachment and personal growth. When the avoidant sees that you are no longer emotionally waiting in the same place, they begin feeling something they tried to avoid before emotional consequence. Suddenly, your absence feels real instead of temporary. They realize you may not always be there to comfort them, support them, or emotionally hold space for them whenever they return. That realization creates anxiety, because now they start imagining a future where someone else receives the version of you they took for granted. Someone else gets your attention. Someone else experiences your loyalty. Someone else receives your emotional warmth and support. And that thought becomes emotionally uncomfortable for them. Avoidants often do not process emotions in the moment. Pushy, meant. Many only begin understanding the depth of their attachment after distance creates emotional clarity. While you were constantly available, they could suppress feelings through emotional avoidance. But once your energy genuinely starts moving away, those suppressed emotions rise to the surface. Now memories hit differently. The conversations they ignored begin replaying in their mind. Your kindness becomes more visible. Your emotional presence becomes harder to replace. And this is where many avoidants suddenly try reconnecting. Not because you begged them to stay. Not because you forced emotional conversations, but because they finally experienced the emotional weight of losing you. Most people weaken this process by staying emotionally available forever. Even after being ignored, disrespected, or emotionally neglected, they continue waiting. And unfortunately, unlimited access often reduces emotional urgency. But when your energy becomes unavailable, your value becomes clearer. This is why self-respect is so important. The avoidant must feel that losing you is a real possibility, not an empty threat. That only happens when your growth is genuine. You are no longer trying to, pushy, hold on to the relationship at any cost. You are building a life that continues moving forward whether they return or not. That energy is powerful because it removes emotional control from the avoidant. They can no longer assume they have endless time. They can no longer assume you will always remain emotionally attached despite inconsistency. And suddenly, they begin fighting for something they once neglected. Because people often recognize value most clearly when access is no longer guaranteed. When you stop begging for love and start protecting your peace, your presence becomes more meaningful. Your attention feels earned instead of automatic. And the avoidant begins realizing that your absence is not just silence anymore, it is the possibility of losing someone who may never return emotionally the same way again. At the end of the day, the biggest mistake people make with avoidance is believing love must be chased, forced, or constantly proven. But real emotional power does not come from begging someone to stay. It comes from knowing your worth deeply enough to stop abandoning yourself in the process of loving another person. The moment you stop making the avoidant the center pushy, F your emotional world, you begin reclaiming your confidence, your peace, and your identity. And ironically, that is often the exact moment the avoidant begins feeling your value more strongly than ever before. The truth is, avoidants are not always moved by emotional pressure, constant reassurance, or endless pursuit. Many of them only begin to confront their true feelings when space forces them to experience your absence. When your attention is no longer guaranteed, your presence becomes more meaningful. When your energy stops revolving around them, they begin questioning what life feels like without you in it. This is why rebuilding yourself is so powerful. It changes the emotional dynamic completely. You stop operating from fear, and you start operating from strength. But this journey is not only about making an avoidant come back. It is about becoming emotionally stronger regardless of the outcome. It is about learning how to love without losing yourself. It is about creating emotional stability inside yourself instead of depending on another person to provide it for you. Because when your happiness, confidence, and peace no longer depend on someone else's consistency, you become emotionally free. And emotionally free people carry a presence that is impossible to ignore. You must remember this deeply. Your value does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it at the right time. Your love, loyalty, and emotional depth are not weaknesses. The problem begins only when you keep giving those things to people who are unwilling to meet you with the same energy. The strongest thing you can ever do is protect your peace while continuing to grow. Stay kind, stay grounded, but never shrink yourself emotionally just to keep someone from leaving. The right connection will never require you to destroy your self-respect in order to maintain it. And if the avoidant finally comes back, let them return to someone stronger, someone calmer, someone who has rebuilt their confidence, discipline, and emotional boundaries. Let them meet the version of you that no longer chases love out of fear. Because the moment you truly realize your worth, everything changes. Your energy changes. Your standards change. Your presence changes. And sometimes the most powerful way to make someone value you is to finally value yourself first. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly hope this message helped you see your value more clearly and reminded you that your peace should never depend on another person's inconsistency. Keep growing, keep healing, and keep becoming stronger every single day. Take care of yourself, stay confident, and never forget your worth. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next one.